Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy little human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I am so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all this craziness, you and I were able to find each other on this cute little earthly rotation. My name is Brittany, or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, or as they're better known as, the DC Snipers. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week, and I would love it if you would come and hang out with me and my friends and all the Brat Pack and just become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. Okay, now that we're done with that pesky but totally necessary self-promotion, we can get into the story. And man, this is a long one and this is an intense one. I had heard of this story, as I'm sure most people in America have heard of this story, but I had never gotten like really into the deep parts of it, the nitty-gritty, until a friend of mine named Josh. Hi Josh, hi Whitney, if you were watching. He suggested that I do this case, and then I started looking into the story and I fell into a giant DC sniper-sized hole, as I sometimes do. So I dove deep, real deep, and oh my god. But if you don't know what the DC sniper attacks are, which they're often sometimes referred to as the Beltway sniper attacks, I had never heard them called that, but when I looked online, they're called either the DC sniper attacks or the Beltway sniper attacks. Well, what this was a series of coordinated shootings that took place over a 3-week period of time in October of 2002, and all of these shootings happened around Washington, DC, which is the capital of the United States. But John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo did way more than I even knew. So with all of that said, let me just get into actually telling you the story, because it's a lot. So come, gather around and let me tell you the story of John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, the DC Snipers. So the famed shooting started on October 2nd, 2002 at approximately 5:30 p.m. when a bullet shot through the glass of a Michael's craft store and narrowly missed its cashier. And the cashier of the store was rattled, as one would be, but she was unharmed because the bullet had entered high at about 6 feet high and had gone right over her head. And since nobody had been injured and nothing really else had happened yet, this was seen as a fluke and wasn't ringing any alarm bells of authorities. But this would soon change when another shot was fired just a couple minutes away from Michael's craft store. Approximately an hour later, a 55-year-old man named James Martin was shot and killed in the parking lot of a grocery store as he loaded his groceries into his car. James Martin had just gotten off of work and was just stopping in to grab some food for his family and then was going to head home to his wife and his young son when he was shot. And there was an officer nearby who tried to help him. He found him on the ground bleeding, but he was unable to save him and he died shortly thereafter. Police started looking into the murder and were trying to figure out like who would want to kill this guy. Why was he shot in the street? And they didn't get any real time to like chill and look into this one murder, because the following day they were going to be inundated with phone calls of reports of other shots being fired, because the snipers on this day decided they were going to go hard. The following day they were going to murder 4 people over a period of 2.5 hours, and all within the same 10 square miles. The shooting started in the early morning hours before 8 a.m. on October 3rd. 39-year-old James Buchanan, who went by Sonny to his friends and his family, was shot as he mowed grass outside the Fitzgerald Auto Malls. Sonny, who his sister described as just being like a really great, fun-loving, just an overall good guy, was rushed to the hospital, but it was found that his heart had already stopped and he had lost most of the blood in his body, so he was unable to be saved. Shortly thereafter, at approximately 8:15 a.m., 54-year-old Prem Kumar Welekar, who was a taxi driver by trade, was filling up his taxi at the Mobil gas station when he was shot. He then staggered over to a woman who was at the gas station with her daughter filling up her car with gas, and he fell at her feet, covered in blood, and she called the police and reported the murder. Again, about 30 minutes later, 34-year-old Sarah Ramos was sitting on a bench waiting for a bus. She had just cracked open a book when she was shot in the head where she sat waiting for the bus. And initially, people on the scene thought that she had just killed herself because, like, what else would you think? So when they called the police, they reported it as a suicide, but when police arrived, they realized that she didn't have a weapon on her, and they were able to retrieve the bullet from the building that was behind her, because the bench was in front of it was in a shopping center and it was in front of a building, and the bullet went through the glass and they were able to retrieve it and see that it was, like a sniper round. After the murder of Sarah Ramos, the snipers waited about an hour before killing their next victim, and it was at about 10 a.m. when 25-year-old Lori Lewis Rivera was shot and killed as she cleaned out her car at a Shell gas station. She was just vacuuming her car in the parking lot when they shot and killed her. 25 years old. All of these murders happened between 7:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. And as I said before, they were all within the same 10-mile radius, all within Montgomery County. So it was very clear that they were all connected and they were all within the same police jurisdiction. So police started to look into it and they realized there was no connection between the victims. All the victims were different ages, races, and genders, and it was very clear that robbery was not the motive because all of the shots came from a long distance and nothing was stolen from any of the victims. And police were also stumped because when they looked at the various crime scenes, they realized that there was no heavily wooded area or a place where a sniper could hide to take his shots without being seen. So police started to think, okay, there has to be a car involved. The police's theory that a vehicle was involved was strengthened when an eyewitness at one of the crime scenes reported to police that at the time of the murder, there had been a white box truck present that took off right after the shots were fired. So after the murder of 25-year-old Lori Lewis Rivera, the police thought that they were finally going to get a break and have some time to start looking into these murders because the shootings had stopped. But they weren't going to get as much of a break as they thought. Only 12 hours later, at approximately 9:20 p.m., 72-year-old Pascal Charlotte was shot while going for a walk in his neighborhood. He was just crossing the street when he was gunned down. Pascal's murder location was just out of Montgomery County. It was the first one to leave Montgomery County, and this one was in Washington, D.C. News of these murders hit the media, and people were terrified, dude. The police put out a press conference, and they were just like, listen, these are random, right? It doesn't seem like the murder victims are connected at all. There's no reason to believe that they know their attacker. So this is just somebody going out and killing people at random while they're outside. And people were just like, excuse me? Because that could be anyone. That's such an unsettling thing because that means that literally anyone could be a victim. And police told them that there was no reason to suspect that children would be in any danger. Nobody that young had been shot, but they were going to do everything they could to keep kids indoors, cancel recess, cancel field trips. They were all going to be inside all the time. But after this press conference, parents were kind of like, I don't know if you can actually guarantee me that. So they still started taking precautions. A lot of parents started picking up their kids early from school and started not letting them take the bus or walk to school. They started getting driven to school. So parents were terrified. People were terrified. During this time, the police were really on top of their A game, and not just the Montgomery County police, but police agencies, police departments in the surrounding states were helping the Montgomery County. They were like, okay, banding together, following up on tips, trying to do whatever they could because it was just so incredibly random. The police had virtually no evidence. All they had was the caliber of the gun that had been shot and the fact that there were two vehicles that maybe could be looked into, could be worth looking into. And it was terrifying because the shootings could start again at any time. They just had 4, boom, 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 and then another one. So it was terrifying because they were like, when is this going to start up again? And they were right because they did start up again the very next day on October 4th, 2002. At approximately 2:30 p.m., 43-year-old Carolyn Sewell was loading her minivan filled with items that she had just purchased at another Michael's craft store when she was shot in the chest. This was the first to happen outside of Maryland. All of the other ones, Montgomery County, that's all in Maryland. But Carolyn was the first person to be shot out of Maryland because she was located in Virginia. So she was shot in the chest. She laid on the ground and she begged and prayed for her life to the sky. And she actually did survive. She was the first known victim of the DC snipers to survive her attack. Which, good for her, man. So sad. I cannot imagine going through what these people went through. So at this point, the shooters decided that they were going to space out their crimes a little more. And the next shooting didn't actually happen for 3 days. But When this shooting happened, the next one, 3 days later, it rocked the community more than they thought was possible, which at this point, with everything I've told you, can you imagine how much worse it could get? It gets worse. It gets much worse. On October 7th, 2002, 13-year-old Iran Brown had just been dropped off at school an hour early by his aunt because she was running late for work and she needed to get him to school before she went to her job. As she was pulling away, she heard a shot, and she turned around to see that her 13-year-old nephew had been shot in the chest while he entered his school. Obviously, she freaked out. She scooped him off the ground. He's laying there bleeding. She puts him in the car and she rushes him to the hospital. And somehow, despite having a bunch of damage to his major organs, he was able to survive this and actually ended up testifying at the trials once these guys were caught. The same day that this shot happened, the police chief of Montgomery County gave a press conference about what happened, and he actually cried. Investigators went in real hard after this because this was kind of like a kid being shot in front of his school was sort of the last straw for a lot of people, and they started doing extensive searches around the area of the school. I read that it was described as a shoulder-to-shoulder search. The people were standing right next to each other, combing every bit of ground, and while doing this, they found an area that they believed had been disturbed. And in looking further, they found that this is actually where the shooters have set up to take their shot. At this scene, the police found shell casings from the bullets that were shot. In addition, they found a tarot card. It was the death card, which if you're unfamiliar with tarot, I'll put a picture. And on this card, the murderers had written a message specifically for police. The card said, "For you, Mr. Police, code, call me God. Do not release to press." Police did what they could to try to ensure that this information wasn't released to the press, but unfortunately the press are everywhere. They're on the scene at every investigation, and it was leaked and it was released to the press just 1 day later. So, and side note real quick, I wonder about these men when it came to the tarot card, because I started thinking about it, and I wonder if they know about tarot, because first off, the death card, if you don't know, isn't really about death as much as it's about like change and transformation. And in theories of why these two men did what they did, I wonder if they knew that or not, because it could go either way, but we'll get to that later. I just wanted to mention that because I'm wondering if they actually knew, if they're like, death, cool, let's leave this, you know what I mean? A day after the tarot card was released to the media on October 9th, 2002 at approximately 8:20 p.m., 53-year-old Dean Myers, who had been a civil engineer and had served in Vietnam, was shot and killed at a gas station as he pumped gas into his car while he was driving back to his home in Virginia. This guy was just trying to get home from work, murdered at the gas station. 2 days later, October 11th, 2002, 53-year-old Kenneth Bridges is shot while he pumps gas at a gas station in Virginia. October 14th, 2002 at approximately 9:15 p.m. 47-year-old Franklin, who actually worked at the FBI as an FBI analyst, was shot in the head while loading her car in a Home Depot parking structure standing next to her husband, which is just the most horrifying thing. I can't even imagine that. Like, imagine standing next to your wife or your husband or your partner and they just get shot in the head and killed right in front of you. And they weren't like in a parking lot, they were in a parking structure, so they thought that they were in a safe space. It's just so sad to me. That one gets me. The idea of seeing your loved one get killed just gets me. It was after this murder of Linda that police thought that they were getting a lucky break in the case, because there was a man who claimed to have been an eyewitness at the time of Linda's shooting, who had been inside the Home Depot at the time that she was shot, who said he saw who actually shot her. But it turns out this man, whose name was Matthew, was actually just lying. So why? I don't know. Probably just so he could be part of an ongoing, very popular investigation. But this man, this is what he told police. This man told police that he had been walking out of the Home Depot when he saw a man crouching down with a rifle, saw him take the shot, and then saw him climb inside of a white or cream colored van that had a broken taillight and took off. So police, thinking they had a legit tip, released this information to the media, and it took them 2 days to realize that this guy was lying and that they were on a wild goose chase looking for this van. I did read, however, just so that you know, that this guy actually did get arrested for giving a false claim and interfering in an ongoing investigation. So, good. Don't do stupid shit like that, guys. Why do people do that? I don't know. After this shooting, the snipers took another break, and it would be another 5 days before they committed another murder, and this would happen on October 19th, 2002. At approximately 8 p.m. on October 19th, 37-year-old Jeffrey Hopper was shot while he stood next to his wife in a parking lot of a restaurant. His wife, Stephanie, as I'm sure you can imagine, panicked, freaked out, and had like a difficult time getting her cell phone out to call the police, but she was able to do that. She called the police, and luckily for them, after several surgeries, Jeffrey did recover from his injuries. Thank God. Thank Job. So police are investigating this shooting, and in doing so, they find a tree that's close to the restaurant. And attached to this tree is a Ziploc bag, and inside the Ziploc bag was a 4-page letter from the shooters demanding a $10 million ransom, among other things. This letter, however, was one of the points where the shooters started to make some mistakes and to actually leave evidence. On the Ziploc bag where the little like zip thing is, apparently this is like a really hot spot for gathering DNA, and there was DNA on the Ziploc bag. Unfortunately, though, it didn't match anybody in the DNA database. Of course not. So in addition to that, the police knew that this was actually the same shooter, though, and not a fluke, due to one, the fact that it's so close to the shooting scene, and two, in the letter, they used the same code, "Call me God." In the letter, okay, they said also that they had the phone number to the restaurant where the man had been eating prior to being shot, and that they were going to call that restaurant the following morning to speak to police at about 6 a.m. So police went on to have a press conference, and in the press conference, they spoke directly to the shooters, and they were like, "Hey, we got your message. We do want to talk. We are going to be at the restaurant tomorrow morning to take that call." So the following morning, police set up, they went to the restaurant, and the call actually did come in. And this was the first time that police actually got to speak directly to the sniper. And in this call, apparently the sniper said, like, "You need to comply with all the demands, or we're going to kill more people." And they also said that they wanted the police to give a message to the media, and they wanted this message to be, and I quote, "The sniper has been caught like a duck in a noose," which I don't know what that means. Let me know down below if you know what that means. But he ended the call, the sniper, with saying that your children are not safe and that more people would be killed if the demands were not met. So while this call is happening, police do trace the call, and they trace it to a gas station in Virginia. So police obviously rush on over there. By the time they get there, the freaking snipers are obviously gone, but when they get there, they arrest 2 suspects who were sitting in a white van near the payphone. And why they suspected this white van, I'm not 100% sure, because the 2 cars that were given as like cars of interest by tips were a white box truck and a blue Chevy, but I guess a white van is close enough to a white box truck for police to be interested. And so these 2 men are arrested, and it turns out that these 2 men just happen to be illegal immigrants. And I read 2 different conflicting bits of information on what the fate of these 2 men were. One thing said that they were released once they were found to have nothing to do with the shootings, which they had nothing to do with the shootings. They did nothing wrong. They were just chilling, not killing. But another report I read said that these men ended up getting deported. I don't know what's true. If you know, please let me know. Because how messed up is that if that's what happened? That makes me so mad. And I need to know how frustrated to be by this information. So if you know, please let me know. On October 22nd, 2002, the final victim of the DC snipers was murdered. This was a 35-year-old man named Conrad Johnson, who was a husband and father of 2. He was shot at 5:56 a.m. while he stood on the steps of his bus that he drove. He was a bus driver, and he was just standing on the steps getting ready to start his route when he was shot and killed. This one is so... so I watched interviews with Conrad's mom, and it's just so sad, because apparently what happened was there was an older woman, like an elderly woman on his bus route, who was super, super scared of the snipers. Like, heard what was happening, was super scared. So he would get out of the bus and escort her into the bus every day and be like, don't worry, they have to go through me to get to you. And like really, you know, make her feel safe with him around. And just to know that he would do things like that and then he ended up being killed by them is so sad. And to hear his mom talk about him is just heartbreaking. Another letter was left at this murder scene, and it said that police's incompetence had cost them another life. With this final murder, the death toll for the DC snipers was 15 murders. That might not add up properly to you if you've been keeping track, but we're going to get into why that is in a moment. So while this murder spree was happening, the media was just eating it up, man. They were broadcasting it 24/7. After each murder would take place or after any of the shootings would take place, they would run live coverage of the aftermath for hours at a time. And America's Most Wanted even picked up the story and did an episode in hopes that it would help police find these men faster. People were super stressed all around the area, especially if you were going to like a gas station, man. Apparently some gas stations even put tarps up so that their patrons wouldn't be able to be seen from the street. And in places where there wasn't protection like that, people would legitimately like run around their car to make themselves more difficult moving targets. If you were walking through a parking lot, you walked quickly. Like nobody could chill. There was no chill in that area. And I can't even imagine living there while this was happening. It sounds horrifying. I would just never leave my house. I mean, I never leave my house now, but I would just like really never leave my house then. Also, for a mid-video fun fact for you to kind of break up all the horrifying doom and gloom, which, I mean, it's a sad story, so that's going to be doom and gloom, but just a little fun fact for you. The movie Phone Booth, which if you're unfamiliar, it is a movie about a man who is stuck in a phone booth while a sniper is threatening him and kills some people on the street. It's a whole thing. And apparently this movie was actually already filmed and set to be released at about the time that the DC sniper murders started happening. So the movie actually pushed its release date so that it wouldn't be in bad taste for what was going on, because it was just coincidence that it was coming out at the same time. So the movie's release was pushed, and I thought that was a little fun fact for you. So moving on. As I said before, the Montgomery Police Department and all the departments in the neighboring states and neighboring areas were so vigilant on trying to solve these freaking murders. Anytime a new call came in reporting another shooting, they would rush over, they would close down roads, they would check every car coming in and out of the area, they canvassed areas, they did a lot of footwork, interviewed everyone, pulled surveillance footage, like they were doing everything they could. They even set up a tip line, but this ended up being mostly dead ends. They followed every single lead, but most of them all led to dead ends. So we're going to go back a little bit now. Remember I told you about the day that those two men who just happened to be illegal immigrants were arrested, and the way that they got to that point is because the police had taken a call from the shooters where they were able to trace the call. Okay, well, on that call, in addition to giving their demands and threatening children, they also started to brag a little bit. He started to brag about how great he was, about what a great shot he was, and he started to brag about a murder. But it wasn't a murder that happened in the DC area. No, it was a murder that had happened before the DC shootings even started in Alabama. Bragging about this crime ended up being the duo's downfall, because not only did this link them to another 5 murders, that's why before when I said 15 it didn't add up right, it's because there's another 5 we haven't talked about yet, but it also ended up linking all the crimes together through fingerprint evidence. Apparently at the murder scene in Alabama, the suspects had dropped a magazine, and on this magazine there was a fingerprint that the police in the area had not yet processed, which, why do you wait so long to process a fingerprint? I don't know, but they hadn't. So they had the magazine flown out to the DC area, they processed it, and there was a match to a 17-year-old kid named Lee Boyd Malvo. Lee Boyd Malvo was born in Kingston, Jamaica on February 18th, 1985, making him an Aquarius. Though Lee was born to both parents, his father Leslie Malvo and his mother Una James, the two never married and actually ended up separating in 1990 when Lee was 5 years old. Lee's upbringing was a bit turbulent because when his parents separated, he went and lived with his mother, and she was a bit of an abusive woman. She would physically and verbally abuse Lee if he did anything that she perceived to be disobedient or disrespectful, and eventually she just started disappearing on him throughout his life. He at one point was sent to live with an aunt, he was sent away to live at school, he was just bounced around a lot, and his mother was never there. She was the type of person who would just pop in and pop out without warning, which is really, really difficult for any kid to grow up with. This lack of stability caused by his mother always coming in and out of his life and his father just being out of the picture altogether brought a lot of stress and depression and anxiety into Lee's life. And it was no surprise, if you think about his upbringing, to know that he would cling on to someone when they finally gave him the attention that he had been lacking his whole life. And that's exactly what happened when he met John Allen Muhammad, a man that was 24 years his senior. Now, the name John Allen Muhammad was a name that at this point was familiar to police, because when they found out that Lee Boyd Malvo was involved, the police were like, there's no way that the 17-year-old kid is acting alone in this. So they started to look into people that Lee knew. They looked into his life and his associate and his arrest records, and they found that Lee was very close with a 41-year-old man named John Allen Muhammad. When they started looking further into John Allen Muhammad, they found that he was a bit of a questionable character. Not only did his ex-wife have a restraining order against him, but he also had a long-range rifle registered to him, and he owned a blue Chevy Caprice, which was very similar to one of the vehicles that had been tipped into police after being seen at one of the crime scenes. Because you remember I told you that there were two cars that were called into police. One was the white box truck, but the other was a blue Chevy, just like the one that John Allen Muhammad owned. As if that wasn't enough for police to be like, I think we have something here. Police had also received a tip. A man had called in from Washington who claimed to be friends with John Allen Muhammad and said that he suspected that his friend was involved in these shootings. Apparently, he had tried to call several times and his calls had just gotten lost in the shuffle and went under the radar, but eventually police did call him back and the FBI actually called him in for an interview. And during the interview, they were like, okay, so why do you think your friend's involved? What about him makes you think that he would be involved in these murders? And they learned some very interesting information. First, he informed police that he had been in the military with John and that he knew that John owned the type of rifle that was being used in the DC sniper shootings. He also let police know about some tension between John and his ex-wife. And John apparently had expressed to this friend that he knew that his wife was now in the DC area, which would explain why he had gone from Washington to the East Coast. So police were like, okay, this sounds promising. So they played that phone call that they had with the shooter. They had recorded it and they played that for John Allen Muhammad's friend. And he's like, oh, I know that voice. That's John Allen Muhammad's little 17-year-old friend, Lee Boyd Malvo. So who is John Allen Muhammad and how is he connected to this 17-year-old kid, Lee Boyd Malvo? I will tell you now. John Allen Muhammad was actually born John Allen Williams on December 31st, 1960, making him a Capricorn, and he was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. John had changed his last name to Muhammad in 2001 after spending several years as part of the Nation of Islam, and what this is a group that aims at improving the spiritual, mental, emotional, and economic status of Black human beings. Muhammad was the last name of the leader of this religious and political movement, and John really looked up to him, and that's why he took his last name. John was born to parents Ernest and Eva, but tragically John's mother passed away from breast cancer when John was just 3 years old, and his father just up and abandoned him after his mother died, leaving him to be raised by his grandfather and his aunt. John had been married once before, but the marriage ended in divorce, and in 1988 he married his second wife, a woman named Mildred. Mildred and John went on to have 3 children together, 2 daughters and a son, and John was described as being a really good dad. He was strict, but he was fair, and he never yelled at his kids. John had enlisted in the National Guard in 1978, and he was a combat engineer. He also trained as a truck driver, a mechanic, and a metal worker. John didn't particularly love being in the National Guard, but he knew that it provided the life and the financial support that he wanted for his wife, himself, and his kids, so he stuck it out and committed himself to it. And while in the National Guard, he learned how to shoot a rifle, how to assemble a rifle. He learned a lot about guns, and he actually ended up serving in the Gulf War. It was after returning home from the Gulf War that John's ex-wife said that he had changed, and he ended up getting honorably discharged after 17 years of service. And after this, he was a different person to her. He had gotten meaner and darker and more aggressive. He had just come home bitter. She said that he was bitter towards her, the country, and the world at large. She said that he was totally unpredictable, that he would go from being super charming and super sweet like the guy that she knew to being angry and abusive, and that she was scared of him. She had expressed to friends that he had threatened to kill her, and that when he said it, she believed it. So after an extended period of time dealing with the fear and the stress and the abuse, Mildred finally filed for divorce and got a restraining order against John. Now, John was pissed about this, and in retaliation, he kidnapped their children and took them to Antigua, which is an island in the Caribbean. He literally just took the kids and left the country. So while in the Caribbean, John made his money by forging legal documents for the locals. And this is actually how John and Lee Boyd Malvo first ran into each other. Because you see, Lee's mother, Una James, really wanted to go to the U.S., so she got in contact with John Muhammad, who is known for forging legal documents. And she got her paperwork and went to the U.S., just left her son. And because at the time, John and Lee had gotten really close, he stayed with John while his mother left him. So he stayed in the Caribbean with John and his kids, and his mother left to the U.S., abandoning him again at 17 years old. So during this time, John's ex-wife Mildred is losing her shit trying to find her kids, and somehow she discovered where they were, and the kids ended up being forcibly removed from John's care and sent back to the States to be with their mother. And a custody hearing was set in the States for September of 2001. John and his wife Mildred both appeared at this hearing, and it was at this hearing that John learned that Mildred had been awarded full custody of the children and that his visitation rights had been suspended. So his kids had been taken away from him, essentially, and this information broke him. I heard a recording of when he was told that he no longer had visitation of his kids, and he just sounded so confused. And after his wife took his kids from him, he vowed revenge against his wife, and he searched for her and his kids for several months before learning that they were in the DC area. That same year, in 2001, Lee Boyd Malvo followed John Muhammad from the Caribbean to Miami, where he first met up with his mother and then left her to join John in the Bellingham, Washington area. When arriving in the States, he was fingerprinted, which came in handy later. When arriving in Washington with John, Lee converted to Islam, like John had, and he had enrolled in the Bellingham High School per John's suggestion and had listed John as his father. All the while, him and his new father were living in a homeless shelter, but he did not mind because he loved John. He saw John as his leader and his teacher and his father, and John treated him with respect and stuck around and really appreciated him and treated him like his own son. The longer Lee stayed with John, the more he changed, because there were students at Bellingham High School who were interviewed, and they said that at first he seemed really nice. He wasn't particularly extroverted, but he was super polite and respectful and non-aggressive. But the longer he was there, he started to change and got mean and seemed to have anger in him for no reason. After school, almost daily, John and Lee would go to the gun range where he would practice shooting. At one point, John even said that Lee was a better shot than he was. He also taught him everything there was to know about guns so that he could identify any gun that was shown to him and be like, I know what that is. And the two were on like a weird diet where they only ate once a day, and they were super, super strict to it. It was while Lee Boyd Malvo and John Allen Muhammad were living together and training together in Washington that the two actually started their murder spree, but these murders wouldn't be connected to the duo until after the DC sniper murders. On February 16th, 2002, just 2 days before Lee's 17th birthday, John Allen Muhammad sent him to murder a friend of his ex-wife Mildred's. This woman's name was Isla Nichols, and she had been a friend of Mildred's who was pretty vocal about her dislike for John, and had actually been instrumental in pushing Mildred towards actually going through with her divorce from John. So John gave Lee the address to Isla's home in Washington and sent him on his way. But what the two did not know is that day Isla had a visitor, her 21-year-old niece named Kenya Cook. When Lee knocked on the door, it was Kenya, not Isla, who opened the door, and he immediately shot her in the face before taking off and running away from the scene, killing her instantly. The duo then went on a sporadic killing spree in several states as they headed east towards the DC area where John believed his wife and his children to be staying. The next murder happened about 1 month later on March 19th when 60-year-old Jerry Taylor was shot in the chest as he played golf on a golf course in Arizona. The police were later able to link John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo to this murder because the duo had been visiting John's sister, who lived very, very close to the golf course at this time. The duo then waited several months before committing their next known murder, and this happened on August 1st, 2002. On this day, 51-year-old John Guida was changing a tire in a parking lot in Louisiana when he was shot in the frickin' neck. This man lied on the ground and played dead as Lee Boyd Malvo came up to him and robbed him. Once the men left, he got up and ran to a gas station where the paramedics were called. Luckily, he survived, and apparently 8 years after this happened, once the men had already been arrested, Lee Boyd Malvo actually sent him a letter apologizing for what he did to him. Next up, on September 5th, at approximately 10:30 p.m., 55-year-old Paul LaRufa was shot 6 times as he closed up his Italian restaurant in Maryland. Miraculously, this man survived. But apparently, John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo thought that he was dead, and they actually went to his body and robbed him before leaving him for dead. But, he survived, luckily. 2 weeks later, on September 21st, 2002, a 41-year-old man named Millian A. Waldemariam was shot in the head and the back at 12:15 a.m. as he closed up a store in Georgia. Less than 24 hours later on the same day, September 21st, 2002, the two men then tried to rob a convenience store in Alabama. 52-year-old Claudine Parker was shot in the chest during this robbery, and she was killed. Her coworker, 24-year-old Kelly Adams, was shot in the neck during this robbery, but she somehow survived. And this robbery was actually the murder that, when the duo called the police and started bragging about their murder spree prior to the DC sniper killings, this is the crime they were talking about. This is the crime that ended up getting them caught. This is where they dropped the magazine, and this is what inevitably led to their capture. Then just 2 days later, on September 23rd, 2002, 45-year-old Hong Im Ballinger was shot in the head at about 6:30 p.m. and killed in Louisiana. It was just about a week later that the two ended up in the DC area, and the famed DC sniper attacks were thought to have actually started. On October 23rd, police got their first really big break in the case. They suspected John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, but you can suspect, but it's what you can prove. You need a lot of evidence. So that friend who had called in and given a tip on John and Lee in the first place called police and were like, hey, they used to use my backyard for target practice. And they were like, I'm sorry, what? And police headed right over. While searching this man's yard in Tacoma, Washington, they used metal detectors and they found a bunch of shell casings for bullets, and they also found a tree stump that they believed was used for target practice by both John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. So police are now pretty certain that they don't have one shooter, but two shooters, and they were pretty set on the fact that John Allen Muhammad was the other shooter because he had a blue Chevy Caprice registered to him, which was one of the cars that had been seen leaving the scene of one of the crimes. So police started looking into this car, and they found this car had actually been approached by police twice during the murder sprees in DC. Once they were pulled over for minor traffic violations, but this was on October 3rd when 4 of the murders took place. And then again, they were approached by police on October 8th, which was one of the killer's off days, because they were found sleeping in their car in Maryland. So police used the media and they again put on a press conference and they were like, hey, this is the car we're looking for, blue Chevy Caprice, keep your eyes peeled. So not only did these men have the police looking for them, but they also had the eyes of all the public on them. There was nowhere for them to hide. 2 days after the duo's final murder, their reign of terror came to an end when at 3:15 a.m. on October 24th, 2002, a man named Whitney spotted the blue Chevy Caprice. This man had been driving home. He had a really long drive home from work late at night, and so he put on the radio and he was listening to the radio as he made his drive, and this is when he heard the broadcast about the Chevy Caprice. So he was like, I'm on the road, I'm gonna look around, and he starts looking. Eventually, he pulls over to a rest area because he's been driving a really long time, and what do you know? There is a blue Chevy Caprice parked at this rest area near the Interstate 70. The two men were sleeping in their vehicle, so police got ready. They armed up, they brought SWAT. They were fully expecting to have a shootout because of these men. They loved shooting. That's what they did. So they were ready and prepared for that. But the two men were arrested without a hitch. There was not a shootout. They just walked up to the car and they're like, okay, this is it. You're under arrest. And the men didn't say anything to the police. Another mid/end fun fact for you that I found when looking into this case that I found to be incredibly interesting is that the blue Chevy Caprice that John and Lee used during their murder spree was actually an undercover police car in New Jersey prior to being owned by John Allen Muhammad. So I just thought that was really interesting that they were using an actual prior undercover police car to commit all of their murders. While searching the vehicle, the police found a long-range rifle in the car, along with a bipod, which is like a tripod, but it's only got 2 legs, and you use it to put a gun on to steady it when you take a shot. And these were found inside of a bag in the vehicle. Later, when they, followed up and looked into the ballistics, they found that this is the gun that was used in the majority of the DC murders and in some of the murders that happened prior to them showing up in the DC area as well. In the car, they had a solar charger, a computer, notes on their attacks, maps that showed areas where the murders had took place, and maps that showed areas where they planned to kill people in the future. These crimes were incredibly planned out, and the police were starting to see this. They had always chosen areas where it would be super easy for them to escape after the murders. They always headed north on the freeway after the murders instead of south so they wouldn't get stuck in traffic. They would show up at the murder scenes after they had actually committed the murders and watch the police investigate from a distance. They would also show up at press conferences for, as they described it, intelligence gathering. And the two had set up this vehicle and modified this vehicle to make it a killing machine. Police found that the way that they were committing these murders is they had modified the car in such a way that they had hollowed out the back so that a grown man could actually lay on his stomach and shoot out of a hole that was near the license plate. So what they would do is one person would sit in the front seat and then the other person would go into the back seat, pull the back seat down, and then climb into the trunk. They would then pop the trunk so it was just open a little bit so that they could put the gun through that little hole, and they would wait for the all clear from the lookout in the front before taking their intended shot. Not all the shots were taken from the trunk, however, because eventually, after getting away with it several times, they started to get cocky and they would actually get out of the car and just stand in the open and take their shots. There were a lot of different theories as to why these men did what they did. One big one that a lot of people believe is that Mildred, John's ex-wife, was actually the main intended target, that they chose to kill all of these other people because if just Mildred was killed, John would be an obvious suspect. But if a bunch of people were killed and Mildred just happened to be one of them, it would look more like a random act of violence, not somebody who knew her. John never admitted to this, however, and they never found any evidence other than just a feeling that made them believe that this was actually true. It was also thought that this could have been financially motivated, since when the duo left letters for the police, they actually did ask for $10 million in ransom. I don't know how much I actually believe that one myself, but it was also thought that just in general, John losing his kids made him break, and that combined with whatever happened to him in the Gulf War just made him into somebody who was on the verge of a break, and it just made him want to kill people. As for Lee, again, there are several theories as to why people would think that this kid, the 17-year-old kid, would want to do this. When questioning Lee, he said, if you want to understand his psyche, you should watch the movie The Matrix. And now, if you've never seen The Matrix, which I'm sure you have, and if you haven't, where have you been? It's so good. Essentially, it's about a man, Neo, who is taken under the wing of somebody who says how special he is and how he's destined to be somebody, and molds him, and then they go on to fight, to try to fight and bring down some tyrannical leaders. John Allen Muhammad would often tell Lee that they needed to bring down the government and bring down the leaders. So it was thought that Lee killed because John wanted him to kill, and that he wanted to please John, and that essentially Lee Boyd Malvo was brainwashed. But not everybody subscribes to this theory. A lot of people don't believe that he was brainwashed. They believe that maybe he was molded and taught by John, but that Lee was completely in control of his faculties and made his own decisions and liked what he did. He wasn't brainwashed, he was just coached. When Lee was arrested, at first he didn't want to talk to police, but eventually the woman who was asking him questions asked him like if he was hungry, and he was like, I could really go for a veggie burger. And so she was like, okay, I'll definitely get you a veggie burger. So she got him 2 veggie burgers and some water, and then a dialogue opened up between the two of them. He told police that he would fast before the shootings because it made him a better shot. He said that him and John had planned to do 5 murders in one day because they knew that police could not keep up with all of these shots, especially if they were close together. He detailed each killing, and when he would talk about like how good of a shot he would actually laugh about it. And he said that John was his best friend, his father, and that the two did everything together. Even though Lee Boyd Malvo was only 17 at the time of the murders, he was up for the death penalty. But ultimately, he was found guilty in 2003 of capital murder and was given life in prison instead of the death penalty. Apparently, the Supreme Court changed its laws regarding minors being given life in prison in 2012, and in 2016, it was decided that this new law would be applied retroactively. And what this means, it means that minors who committed a crime and were sentenced to life in prison prior to the new law being put into place could have their prior sentences changed to reflect the new law. That's what that means. Sorry. So the Supreme Court decided that they would hear Lee Boyd Malvo's case, and then they would decide his fate. But prior to that hearing taking place, Lee actually, what's the word I'm looking for? He withdrew his request for resentencing because in the state of Virginia, legislation was signed in 2020 that said that minors who were given life in prison could now be up for parole after 20 years. And he thought that this seemed like a better deal for him than going and trying to just be resentenced altogether. So currently he is serving his 4 life sentences in Virginia. And with this new legislation, he could be up for parole in 2022. However, even if he's paroled in 2022, he still has to then serve his 6 life sentences for the crimes that he committed in Maryland. So either way, he's gonna be in prison for a long time. Supposedly, Lee Boyd Malvo has changed a lot in prison now that there's been some distance between him and John, and he has acknowledged how horrible what he did actually was. He says that he was a monster, a ghoul, and a thief who stole people's lives. He has said that John Allen Muhammad told him that who he was needed to die, that Lee Boyd Malvo, who he had been before meeting up with John, needed to die and no longer exist. He also describes feeling regret for at least one of the murders. In an interview he did in 2012, he described the murder of Linda Franklin, the woman who was shot in the head at the Home Depot in front of her husband. He says that the pain that he saw in her husband's eyes will never leave him, that it's a type of pain that's indescribable that he had never seen before, and that haunts him, which good. And he also said that there was one time that he defied orders from John Muhammad. Apparently John had told him that he needed to kill a pregnant woman, and this was like the line for Lee. So when he set up to take the shot and didn't take it, he said to John, he just lied to him and said that the conditions weren't right. But in actuality, he just would not kill a pregnant woman. Apparently he's doing okay though. Whether he's racked with guilt or not, I am not truly sure, but he did marry last year in 2020 at the age of 35. There isn't a lot of details about the wedding because apparently, according to the prison, it's not information that has to legally be released, so it hasn't been, but from like people who were present, his lawyer, stuff like that, they say that she's like a great chick, about the same age as Lee, really smart, educated, pretty, nice. As for John Allen Muhammad, he actually chose to represent himself at trial, which is just so traumatic for the people involved, because this man who shot you or shot your loved one is then questioning you. You're looking at him in the eyes and he's questioning you, and just the audacity of that. At his trial, though, it was never actually proven that he took the shots. They had a lot more evidence against Lee Boyd Malvo and not as much against him to prove that he actually ever shot anyone. But they were able to sentence him using something called the Trigger Man statute. It essentially means that even though he may not have taken the shot, he assisted in such a way, was a lookout in such a way, and made it so that these crimes could not have been committed if he had not been there, and therefore he was just as guilty of the murders as Lee Boyd Malvo. It was also determined that John Allen Muhammad's crimes were an act of terrorism because his point was to terrorize the government and the community at large. And in 2004, he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. He, of course, tried to appeal with his attorney saying, like, this man has brain damage and should not have been competent to stand trial, let alone be his own attorney, but this was denied. John's ex-wife, Mildred, was shocked when she found out what John had done, that the man who had terrorized her for the last few years of her marriage was also the man who had been terrorizing the DC area for all those weeks. And she was even more shocked to find that a lot of the police believed that she was his intended target. She and her children had a hard time dealing with knowing what he had done and knowing that he was going to be executed for it. There were interviews with his daughter, and he has two daughters, and there were interviews with both daughters, and they were just kind of saying that, like, there was just sadness and anger. Sadness in knowing what he had done, sadness in knowing that he was going to be put to death, but also anger in knowing what he was done, and anger in knowing that there's so many questions that they have that they would just never be able to get answers for, even if he did live. And anger because he had made it so that he was permanently removed from their lives. Mildred said for her, it wasn't traumatic for him to die because for her, he was a stranger. She had emotionally separated herself from him. And so there wasn't an emotional connection there, but that she felt really bad for her children because her children were losing their father. So any pain she felt was for them. John Allen Muhammad was on death row for 7 years before being executed by lethal injection in the state of Virginia. His final meal was chicken, red sauce, and cake for dessert. He offered no last words and was pronounced dead at 9:11 p.m. on November 10th of 2009. Family members of the victims of the DC snipers arranged for a memorial to be put up in remembrance of their lost loved ones. The Brookside Gardens Reflection Terrace, it's this beautiful, peaceful-looking place with these stone walls. On one, it says, linger here and reflect on those lost to violence, hope for a more peaceful world, seek a reverence for life among all people. On another wall, it lists all the names of all the people who lost their lives at the hands of John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. James D. Martin, James L. Sonny Buchanan, Prem Kumar Welliker, Sarah Ramos, Lori Lewis Rivera, Pascal E. Charlotte, Dean H. Myers, Kenneth H. Bridges, Linda Franklin, and Conrad E. Johnson. But we can't forget those that aren't listed there, the victims that were killed prior to the DC sniper spree. I don't know if it's because it was in a different area that they weren't listed on this wall. I'm honestly not sure why, but they lost their lives too, and their names matter just as much. Kenya Nicole Cook, Jerry Taylor, Million A. Waldemariam, Claudine Parker, and Hong M. Ballinger. And then, of course, there's all the victims who were lucky enough to actually survive their attacks. It's just so incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad for me to think that I just listed names for such a long time, and all of those names are people who are dead. They're people who were murdered and who are gone from this world forever. Their lives were stolen from them, and they were stolen from all the people who loved them, and that's just so sad. Like, I don't even know what else to say. It's just so sad. And that, my friends, is the story of the 15 murders and numerous attempted murders committed by John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. What do you think? I'm just like, wow, dude, it's a lot of information to take in. It's a lot to go over at once, and I'm a little bit at a loss here. I knew of this case, I had heard the basics that 2 men were in a car driving around the DC area shooting people, but I didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know just how many people they killed, dude. Like, how much they did, how many lives were ruined at the hands of these 2 men. To learn how young Lee Boyd Malvo was and to hear like the nuances and weirdness of their relationship and the way that they planned things out, and then to hear from John Allen Muhammad's friends and his ex-wife and his kids, it's just really intense to see how life changes people and experiences change people and other people change people. They just killed so many people and it all happened so quickly. 1 second you're like sitting on a bench reading a book or standing on the steps of the bus ready to go for your bus route or loading your purchases into your car with your spouse, and then you're shot in the head for no reason and with no notice. I can't even imagine. I cannot imagine living in that area at this time and being so terrified to leave your house to do even the most mundane thing. The fear that people must have felt. People ran to their cars. People bobbed and weaved through parking lots to not get shot. And then those who did end up getting shot, and then those who got shot and lived, the trauma those people who survived must have gone through. And then the people who were killed, and then the people who were killed in front of their partners having to live with that image for the rest of their lives. I can't even imagine the trauma of something like that. That's my worst nightmare. That's my actual worst nightmare, is something happening to my husband and in front of me. I could not deal with it. I don't know how anyone could. How do you feel about it? Like, what motive do you subscribe to? I personally think that it was definitely a combination of a few things. I definitely think losing his kids set John Allen off. Whether or not his wife is an intended target, I'm not sure, but he clearly wanted his kids. Whether it was because he actually loved them or had other unrelated reasons for wanting them, or whether he just still wanted to be able to like dominate and control his ex-wife through his kids, I'm not sure, but he definitely wanted them, and losing them was a trigger. I do think that. Now, do I think that every murder was just an elaborate cover-up to eventually murder his wife? Maybe. I mean, the first person they killed was a friend of his wife's that he was mad at, so I definitely think it's possible, but I do also think that he had some bloodlust in general. I think it's definitely likely that he was mad at her, but he was also mad at the world and wanted to take it out on as many people as possible. And as for Lee, man, I don't know, man. He's one that I'm a little conflicted on just because of how young he was. He seems like he could be remorseful, but he also seems like he enjoyed what he was doing when he was with John. So I don't know if I believe that he was completely brainwashed. I don't think... John's influence definitely didn't help, but I do think that he already had anger inside of him. I think that he was upset and angry from a father who abandoned him and a mother who continually abandoned him. Things like that really do affect kids. And then he finally meets somebody who like cares for him and respects him and loves him and treats him the way he should have been treated all along. So of course he's going to want to please this person and do what this person wants and want to be like this person. But all of that aside, he still did what he did and he's still responsible. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that it was interesting and informative, and I hope that I spoke clearly. This is probably, I'm going to guess, my longest video because I've been filming longer than I've ever filmed in my entire life. So I hope that I was able to keep it in a format that made it easy for you to understand. And of course, I hope you enjoyed it because I always want you to enjoy the videos that I put out. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover. I have an ongoing list, but as I said in the beginning, this is a case that was suggested to me. Any case you suggest, I add to my list to look into in the future because I know that you're filled with good taste and good ideas. Otherwise, you would not be here. Of course, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new Morbid makeup video every week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically. And if you want to follow me on my other social media, Twitter and Instagram are both BRATTERSTEIN, just like my namesake here. And I am on both of them every single day. And with that said, thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. You're tight, this is tight, and I hope to see you on my next video.